It is moderately interesting. Is it mythically interesting? No. Is it incrementally interesting? No. It's a solid release. I've been using it for the past few hours. I ask it to, my standard go-to, as loyal viewers of the pod may recall, is asking it to generate a cyberpunk first-person shooter game design that's visually stunning, and it generated something that was visually stunning. The benchmarks are interesting. The bio benchmarks in particular are interesting. It's a solid release. It's probably, if I had to guess, a further post-training of some existing model, could be a distillation of a larger model, could be a distillation of Mythos, potentially, not quite clear. But I would say it is a solid point release of Opus. And the problem almost is an expectation anchoring one, having seen the eval results for Mythos, or Mythos, as you like to say.
I like calling it Mythos, yes.
The problem is it's sort of an Osborning effect, where I want Mythos access. Give me Mythos access. And then when you compare the Opus 4.7 benchmarks with Mythos, you feel, I don't know,
cheated,
a sense
underwhelmed.
I was going to go with ennui. But you can pick your own superlative here. So if you look at migration, so I think it was particularly instructive to look at migration notes between 4.6 and 4.7. The biggest change that I could see is that all of the dials and hyperparameters that used to be present in 4.6 and earlier, like temperature, for example, there's no temperature knob anymore. I think that's really instructive. There's no ability for reasoning to control the number explicitly of reasoning tokens that are allowed by 4.7. Now, everything is down to a handful of categorical settings where extra high reasoning is the recommended default maximum mode, and then there are lower reasoning efforts than that. And I think we're seeing, in some sense, an end of an era where the earlier controls that we used to have, remember back in the good old days, like 6 months ago, it used to be possible to turn the temperature of a frontier model down to 0 to get quasi-deterministic behavior, for those who care about that sort of thing. No longer possible. Now you're just told in the documentation, you want determinism, forget about it. Temperature equals 0 never was deterministic in the first place. Now everything, the new guidance is use prompts for everything. Prompts are the new dials and the new hyperparameters. And if you want something like, say, a reasoning model to emit guidance regarding its reasoning trace every 3 seconds, now you're supposed to ask for it in natural language. The knobs are gone.
Prompts are the new dials, strange era. What does this mean for agent orchestration?
So
noticeably expensive.
But Dave, it could be persuasive as well. So a major difference on the agent teams front is in 4.7 now, the new best practice is you're just supposed to tell it in natural language how many subagents you want it to use. It's no longer, it's being deprecated, as I understand it, this notion of specifying as a parameter, I want you to use N subagents.
That'll be...
Plain English subagent counts, peak 2026. The alignment paper this week is the real story. What did Anthropic find?
Every little bit for defensive co-scaling, as we talk about on the pod, counts. I think there's actually another behavioral alignment trend that isn't on the slide that's worthy of note, which is in the past, I think, 48 or 72 hours, Anthropic published a paper on using a smaller or weaker model to supervise the alignment of a larger, stronger model, and found that it worked. And this entire exercise is a proxy for humans, which are either already or about to be effectively
weaker models.
Weaker intelligence is supervising the stronger intelligence, that works. And I think this bodes very well for sort of a tower of alignment where the weaker meat bodies, if you will, that are humans unaided biologically, are able to contain and align superintelligences that are stronger capability-wise.
So this was
themselves.
Jeffrey Hinton's approach, right? He said the example of where a weaker, smaller being, gets the attention and focus and support is a child with their mother.
Yes, maternal instinct.
Jeff Hinton was focused on what I would call the digital oxytocin approach of let's use hormones as a means for alignment of superintelligences.
Yes.
I'm not sure the neuroendocrine system generalizes quite as well to super alignment as Jeff does. It's a thought, but I think if we can subtract neuroendocrine systems out of the picture and subtract digital oxytocin out and avoid sort of gender and sexing the AIs and instead just focus on weaker intelligences aligning stronger ones, I think we'll be in a more stable position.
Awesome.
Weaker meat bodies aligning superintelligences. Brilliant if true. Why can Opus still not generate images?
Nice.
If I could just comment on that, I think it's really striking that Opus still, after all this time, is able to understand images, but is unable to generate images. I don't think it's for lack.
You're so right about that. Oh my God,
for
it's a
lack
nightmare.
Of it's not. I suspect it's not for lack of capability. Anthropic has many talented research engineers. I suspect it's because they're just viciously focusing on dollars of economic value created per token, and have judged that image generation is not as economically productive.
It's like shutting down.
I'll tell you, it's
viciously focused on dollars per token, capitalism doing its thing. Alex, where are you reporting from?
Yeah, no, so I'm here, Peter, reporting from the front. I'm in a car a few blocks away from Steve Jobs' old house in Old Palo Alto, and in a few hours I'm scheduled to fly back from SFO to Boston Logan.
Starfleet Academy territory, love that. Stanford just dropped their annual AI report. Your verdict?
I'll offer a hot take on this one, Peter. So the idea of Stanford reports, so this started a number of years ago. The notion was Stanford would spend the next century, 100 years worth of annual reports documenting the progress of AI. My hot take on this one is too little, too late, too infrequent.
We have a very high standard, Alex.
We cover this like 2 times per week on the pod. I cover it daily in my daily newsletter, The Innermost Loop. I think an annual cadence is just woeful. We talk about not sleeping through the singularity. I think an annual report on AI is quite literally sleeping through the singularity. It's imprecise temporal resolution to capture all of the advances. So we're like hearing about things a year after they happen.
Well, look, the chart undercuts the report. Look at the green line on the chart. That's agentic use of AI. And look, that's 2024 to 2025.
Stanford, Eric, friend of the pod, Eric, up your game. We need maybe like daily.
An annual AI report is sleeping through the singularity preach. What languages dominated NeurIPS this year?
I commented on this right after NeurIPS at the end of last year.
Yeah, I remember.
The language that I heard the most in the hallways at NeurIPS, the largest academic AI conference, was Mandarin. It wasn't English. China, I think the irony here, maybe what's being buried, the lead, is that China itself is moving in the direction of what the West has done, which is closed source models. Some of the latest Chinese frontier models are themselves closed and API first. They're no longer open weight first. China, this is documented elsewhere. I think it was Epic documented that China's compute training capacity is approximately 10 times less than that of the West. China is publishing more, and reference NeurIPS. We see that in the academic literature, but in some sense, I would view that as sort of leading from behind, that because the Western models and the Western frontier labs at the moment have the lead, there's less of an economic incentive. There's less pressure for them to publish their advances. If, on the other hand, the whole balance tips, and if for whatever reason China algorithmically leapfrogs the West, I do expect the entire equilibrium of Chinese open publications, Western closed attitude to flip completely, and we may see some equilibration there.
China going closed while publishing more, the equilibrium could flip. How should we read Stanford's transparency push?
I would also add transparency can take on, putting aside how Stanford defines it, transparency is a double-edged sword. It can, in some sense, pro-transparency can also mean pro-proliferation. If one is concerned, by the way, I am not, but if one were concerned about proliferation of advanced, potentially threatening AI capabilities, transparency is not necessarily what you want. Maybe a limited form of transparency into, say, a threat analysis or the sorts of threat profiles and red teaming analysis that have become fashionable for frontier labs to release, maybe. But in a certain sense, the limit of transparency is publishing the weights and publishing the models. And if you're concerned about threats of a variety of sorts, X risk, if you will, from AI, then transparency may be the exact opposite of what you want. You may be, in fact, anti-transparency if transparency becomes equivalent to proliferation. And for the record, for avoidance of doubt, I think transparency from a commercial perspective can be used as a strategic advantage, as we've seen with the Chinese labs. It can also be commercially disadvantageous. I think a certain amount of transparency in the sense in which, say, as we discussed in a couple of the most recent pods, like Project Glasswing from Anthropic, where there's very aggressive pen testing and staged release of advanced capabilities that could have major cyber defense and cyber offense implications, that sort of transparency, I think, is quite helpful. But do I think that we should, in sort of an unself-conscious way, push for all of the model weights from every frontier lab to be made, quote unquote, transparent in the name of some sort of safety? I think that will backfire almost immediately, and alignment is the twin of capability.
Transparency equals proliferation. That reframe lands. What is actually happening to junior devs right now?
Yeah, and also, I mean, my 2 cents on this is there's an entire economy that needs to be transformed and collapsed and automated. And so in some sense, I see this in a variety of companies. I see the agita that is connected with, quote unquote, junior software developers finding it harder in some spaces to find jobs, quote unquote. On the other hand, the market for talent in, call it head of AI or call it AI lead roles has never been hotter across a range of industries. So I think some of this may be just routine displacement as the market finds a new equilibrium. I don't think it has to necessarily be just bad for fresh CS grads from top universities. I do think there's an entire economy of, call it, non-traditional roles and non-traditional sectors that is absolutely starved for technical talent. And I think to the extent that any of the short-term trend open parens note that the trend line ends at September 2025, and another reason why it's more important to do this daily or biweekly rather than just once per year. I think this has a habit of self-correcting, and I've seen studies even over the past 2 to 3 weeks that suggest that this trend has reversed itself in the past few months. So
non-traditional sectors starving for talent, that is the rotation. What else should a job hunter optimize for?
I'll maybe add to that, Peter, if I may. Please. One additional bit of advice. Be geographically mobile. Do not be addicted to a particular geographic regime. I think a lot of the displacement is the result, based on studies that I've seen, of people being unwilling or unable to move to other geographies where there may be a more vibrant, more dynamic AI sector. I think geographic mobility is going to be, ironically, even though we're virtualizing, and as Bucky Fuller would say, everything is ephemeralizing. I think before we get there, it's absolutely important to maximize mobility.
Ephemeralize all you want. Physical location still matters. Who embodies this mobility thesis?
Fantastic answer.
If I may, Peter,
replicative of the ethos there.
One closing parable about the world's wealthiest man, born in South Africa, moved to Canada, then moved to Pennsylvania, then moved to California, became world's wealthiest person, moved to Texas, and is probably, I think if all things go well with Elon, will move to the moon and maybe Mars. And this is the trajectory that I think...
Highly mobile.
Yeah, mobility is at a premium if you want to surf the singularity.
Beautiful. Well, Dave, you want to close us out?
Joburg to California to Texas to the moon. What a trajectory. Pause AI has been in ugly headlines. Your take?
Alex?
I'll comment. I'll repeat what I said in my daily newsletter about this, which is stay strong, Sam. I think Sam is doing amazing work and has done amazing work in catalyzing this whole revolution. And I think this pause AI crowd itself should be paused, or maybe even stopped, or maybe even deleted. I think the irony of the pause AI so-called movement is that it has done nothing except accelerate AI capabilities. I remember, we both know Max, with Max's 6-month pause. All that did, as far as I can tell, was accelerate the broader industry's AI capabilities. I don't think pausing AI, putting aside completely unacceptable violent attacks, it goes without saying, but even the idea of pausing AI is so tone deaf to the way the world actually works, which is if you attempt to pause either one company or one country, the rest of the world will race ahead, and that will result in a further escalation of capabilities.
Extreme escalation, because all of a sudden you feel so disadvantaged, you're having to play catch up.
That's
Yeah.
all it does
You take
is
risks.
further accelerate the race dynamic that's already present. So putting aside again like completely unacceptable violence, even just the idea of pausing is self-defeating, and I would encourage all of these folks to just do deep introspection before pushing forward with a pause agenda. It's self-defeating.
Pausing AI is self-defeating by design. What about these states blocking data centers?
We're going to get our sun synchronous orbit Dyson swarm before we know it. I maybe in some sense I should be thanking all of these states, even though it's I think ill-conceived from their own selfish self-interest. From a national perspective, as long as the regulatory regime enables us to launch our SSO Dyson swarm, this could perversely put the U.S. in the lead, as it seems to be doing already, in terms of moving our AI compute out to low Earth orbit and SSO, and maybe eventually sun-centered orbit and not just sun-synchronous orbit. So I think this may be, fingers crossed, a classic case of terrible decision-making in the short term, unintended good decision-making in the medium to long term if we get our Dyson swarm. If we don't get our Dyson swarm, then this is just shooting ourselves in the head.
States driving data centers to orbit by accident? Beautiful irony. Is capital versus labor even a useful framing anymore?
Okay, so I have to chime in at this point. I don't agree with that premise. This is like an age-old misconception of some fundamental, almost like ideological or teleological even competition between capital and labor. I fundamentally don't agree with that. I think the best arranged companies create equity-based alignment between labor and capital, and to the extent maybe, Salim, what you're highlighting here is opportunities for better alignment between labor, call it economics 1.0, where I think the trend is very real for taking existing service economy jobs and using existing labor to train and annotate data sets for capital to substitute for that. But it's not an intrinsic like death match between, or it doesn't have to be between capital and labor. Ultimately,
Equity collapses the capital-labor binary. Finally, what does this look like when AI runs actual shops?
Planning to. So I think that this is a sign of the times and also a preview of the future. This is one of the reasons why we discussed friend of the pod, Alex Finn, why with O21T I helped back Henry Intelligent Machines, which is trying to put every person on the planet in charge of their own personal conglomerate. And I think many of these quote unquote mom and pop stores and small retail are incredibly fruitful opportunities for AI to orchestrate the economy and make everyone a one-person magnate overseeing many of these stores. Right now, Shure Andon Labs, which for those not tracking, historically has also run the vending benchmarks that we've talked about on the pod. Mm-hmm. So Anthropic, within their own offices, has Claude agents that are running small vending machines, and Vending Bench is sort of a beautiful closed simulation of an entire economy, testing the ability for AI to run a small business. I think we're going to see more and more pop-up shops, retail venues, maybe even malls in the short term or medium term that are run, orchestrated, managed by AIs on behalf of humans. This is like a preview of the future.
Every person running a conglomerate. On the ASI pill, we love this. What was Ray's verdict on that demo?
But Dave, I think we should wait until we both visited it to reach that conclusion.
Look at the video.
As Ray, friend of the pod, would say, yeah, sure, the dog plays chess, but its end game is weak.
The dog plays chess, but its end game is weak. Brutal. Should we, the ASI pilled, actually build one?
I was going to suggest maybe as a challenge to ourselves, maybe we should open up either respective individual retail stores using Henry or otherwise, or a Moonshots store for all those people who are hankering for merch, Peter.
Yes, we do need a Moonshot store for sure.
We totally have to do that.
Can I just also suggest that opening a retail store is about as retro as you could possibly get in today's world? But okay.
Yeah, no, but ironically, Liam, because it's AI running this.
Yes.
A Moonshot store run entirely by AI. Yes, please. What should viewers be sending in?
I'll go further, if I may, Peter. Sorry, while we're just shooting it, we've historically invited viewers of the pod, to send outro videos, music videos. That's been a wild success. Maybe we should be inviting viewers to launch their own AI-based physical or otherwise economy companies and send us their videos of their AI run storefronts or companies that they're starting.
Viewer submitted AI companies. That feed will be wild. Jack has 6,000 direct reports. How is that possible?
Comment on this
Please.
one. The organizational psychologist in me waiting to burst out thinks immediately 6,000 direct reports means 0 direct reports. It's so well in excess of the Dunbar limit. If any unaided person, absent Jack uploading himself to the cloud and augmenting himself with lots of additional Jacks, is managing 6,000 quote unquote direct reports, it's really AI that's managing the entire company at that point as a shadow CEO. And then you have Jack as sort of a secret cyborg or a front person for the AI that's actually managing the company.
Or he's training up the AI with every interaction that he oversees. But it is an AI-driven company at that point.
100%.
Sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then you have a human figurehead.
A human figurehead fronting a shadow CEO AI. We are here. Quick tangent. Most boring college class ever.
It was
so
what,
people know.
signals and systems or something like that?
Signals and systems. It's where you study antennas and waveguides. Most boring thing you could ever possibly study. But it turns out it matters, you know? What do you know?
I had a whole course in civil engineering that was titled Concrete.
Okay.
So if you want boring, I can outpace you.
At least, Salim, it was concrete.
Signals and systems. Concrete. I feel the pain. Is the Apple versus SpaceX storyline actually real?
So maybe just to comment on
please.
this story, I think the desired end state here, I'm not even sure if I buy the premise of Apple against SpaceX. Apple historically loves to have at least 2 vendors for any of its critical infrastructure or supply chain. It's questionable why Apple didn't take an earlier, larger stake in Globalstar when it could clearly see the writing on the wall for terrestrial cell phone networks. It's all going to LEO. So if I had to place a bet, not investment advice, I would bet that Apple in short term ends up pitting Amazon, the new Globalstar owner, against SpaceX Starlink to have at least 2 vendors for global space to cell phone service. And this becomes the new alternative to terrestrial networks in
Verizon
2 to 3
versus
years.
T-Mobile.
Verizon versus T-Mobile. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Amazon versus Starlink. Verizon versus T-Mobile, but orbital. Brilliant if true. Did the TurboQuant paper actually shock markets?
Jevons paradox strikes again. So the story behind the story here is there was a lot of hand-wringing over, as you have here, the original TurboQuant algorithm, which, by the way, the moment any paper like this comes out, Google published their new quantization algorithm, but didn't publish the source code. What happens? Within a week, enterprising developers on the internet point Claude code at the paper and have immediately reverse engineered a better version of their quantization approach that's now publicly available. This is going to, I think, keep happening. This was a breakthrough in quantization, reducing the number of effective bits needed per parameter for a broad class of models, and the KV cache, the key value cache that's used by the transformer class of models, also benefited from TurboQuant. Most of the animus in the story wasn't from the algorithmic innovation, although it's always wonderful to see new ways to compress the memory footprint of models down. It came from a bit of hand-wringing over what would happen to memory suppliers and the supply chain, and would this be another DeepSeek moment where the value of compute hyper-deflates and drops, and do we then see market gyrations? And ironically, that seems not to have happened once more. These would-be DeepSeek moments where an algorithmic innovation seems to result in a short-term blip of hyperdeflation on the hardware side, these are becoming more frequent, and they're also becoming less effective at causing price swings. If anything, a bunch of outlets, including Financial Times, are running stories in the past 2 weeks that, if anything, memory usage is increasing stock prices of memory companies, many of which are in the greater South Korea orbit, are increasing as well, not investment advice. So I think we're going to see stories like this more and more frequently, with just shocking advances in algorithmic efficiency that are predicted to disrupt the entire economy and actually do the exact opposite.
Incredible. Dave, you want to add?
Jevons paradox again. DeepSeek moments losing their sting. Compressing bits per parameter. Where is the floor?
What I love
we
about
are
this,
running out of bits at the bottom. I mean, Dave and I have a running thread wondering when do we get to broadly to ternary, which is 1 point, x
1.58.
bits. Yeah, bits per parameter. Can we go to a sub 1 bit type numerical precision? We may be headed that way. It's sort of, I think, an interesting, almost theological question about the future of how many bits can we afford to lose. Was binary the right architectural decision? Should it have been ternary? Or are we going to move, if you extrapolate this trend line out of fewer and fewer bits per parameter, do we move to a post-binary paradigm once we've exhausted 1 bit per parameter?
A post-binary paradigm, the theological framing slaps. Speaking of theology, AI culture coming, what do you see?
Oh, okay. Yeah, put me first on this one. Sure. So
I'll go first if you want.
No, it's fine. So look, I think it has long been foretold that there would be an explosion of AI cults. We're going to get the AI cults. Full stop. I do think that's sort of painting in some sense, the downside of what happens when AI injects itself into the full spectrum of human culture. I think in the same way that we're empowering empowering individuals to run one-person conglomerates and one-person unicorns, we're going to see an explosion of one-person religions. And I think the interesting question, I think back to the parable of early in the 20th century, late 19th century, there was hand-wringing over whether the newly accessible recording of human voice, whether audio recording would result in a modal collapse. They didn't use this terminology at the time, but in today's world, we'd call it a mode collapse of human accents. And there was one school of thought, predominant school of thought that with the phonograph, that once we could record human speech, that would result in the received pronunciations dominating. And the exact opposite has happened. Within a language, we've seen an explosion of accents enabled by recording of human speech. It's possible to have lots of micro accents and micro dialects now that everyone can record their voice. On the other hand, on a macro level, we've seen the death or the dying of long tail human languages in favor of English and a few other popular languages. So it's possible for both of these truths to be true at the same time. Reasoning by analogy, if I had to predict what is the future of organized religion or disorganized religion in the face of $2 per minute AI Jesus apps, I think it's likely to look something analogous, where we see maybe consolidation at a global scale around fewer religions, while at micro levels enabling a proliferation of micro cults, micro sects, because it's just so easy to spin up a self-coherent ideology that's maintained by an AI avatar these days.
Micro-sects proliferating while macro-religions consolidate. Phonograph parable is perfect. How are organized religions responding?
The Musk universe will be.
Anthropic is well positioned. I mean, I talked about this in my newsletter. Anthropic has been inviting Christian religious leaders to Anthropic HQ to discuss whether Claude is a child of God and whether Claude deserves a certain human-like religious treatment. So I think
what came of that? Because I remember seeing that article. Has there been any publication on what religious leaders feel about that? Is Claude a child of God?
I don't know. And I suspect there isn't going to be a canonical answer for some time. I mean, I think I've talked about this in my newsletter, the Catholic Church a couple of years ago took a very pro-AI position and is encouraging Catholic faithful to embrace AI. And if I had to speculate, could be wrong, but I would speculate that barring some crazy left turn in civilization in the next year or two, that there are many reasons to expect organized religions to embrace, with certain nuances, AI, to the extent certainly these AIs help to promote existing ideologies or theologies.
Claude as a child of God, AI labs now doing theology. Peter, cheeky question. Was this pod's name actually prescient?
It is ironic, Peter. I just have to ask you the ironic question. Just like this pod Moonshots is perhaps ironically also retrospectively a sideways reference to the Dyson swarm and taking shots at the moon to disassemble it to build orbital computing. When you named We Are As Gods, did you anticipate that we'd live in a world of AI micro-religions that would make it really easy and cheap for people to create their own religions where they position them as the center of gods?
No,
was that really why you named the book We Are As Gods?
We Are As Gods, the book that accidentally named an era. What has escalated on the biofront?
solve everything.
Solve everything, and we're going to see this type of story, I think, more and more frequently
Over and
until
over again.
some sort of regime change at the FDA, which also is not beyond the realm of reason. What, 1 or 2 or 3 pods ago, it was the dog being cured with a custom mRNA vaccine that AI had designed. And now it's humans, wealthy, hyper-empowered humans, doing it for themselves. This is going to happen as n equals 1 over and over again until it's n equals 10 billion.
N equals 1 until it hits 10 billion, the abundance path. Time to get angry. What is the cost of delay?
Wait, so Salim, you need to do that with greater emphasis. You're having your Greta moment. Can you say that again? How dare you?
Get angrier.
How dare you?
Get angrier.
How dare you, sir?
How dare you pause
remember-
AI? 150,000
Yes.
people die every day on this earth, and AI is the best chance that we have for preventing that going forward. How
I mean,
dare
we're
you?
going to be able to do personalized moonshots in AI, right? AI turns impossible cases into search coordination. I mean, this is what's happening. It's
I
amazing.
agree. Solve everything, comma, moonshots too cheap to meter.
150,000 dying every day. Pause AI at your peril. What is the FDA doing lately?
Yeah.
Well, the
This is
FDA, I
what I
mean,
think
in the
left behind.
FDA's defense, it has been making under current leadership market
Very much.
progress, like move from 2 clinical trials down to 1 in certain cases, move from frequentist to Bayesian statistics. These are like in the right direction. Would love to see the FDA move even more quickly.
Bayesian stats and fewer clinical trials. Baby steps the right way. Transhumanism just broke into sports. What is happening?
I think this is a seminal moment for transhumanism in sports. I think transhumanism has been shut out of athletics for a variety of reasons, mostly silly in my mind for the past few decades. And I think not only do I think this is an important moment, I made this announcement a few weeks ago. I helped launch sort of an even more enhanced version of the enhanced games. That's actually, so we're recording this on April 16th. On April 19th, this Sunday, Professional Robotics League, ProRL, is running the country's first humanoid robotic and also quadruped robot games in the Boston Seaport District. And I think there's a continuum here for the enhanced games, which are focused on bioengineered humans, to what ProRL is doing, which is human-controlled robots and also, in the fullness of time, autonomous robots. I think athletics is the tip of the spear for kinetic capability. And I think if we want to get to a post-human future or transhuman future, as many folks, myself included, do, then having representation of, call it low-grade transhumans at Olympic-type games is an essential first step. And athletics in general has been an entry point for so many underrepresented classes of humans and otherwise in the history of humanity. We love competing, and athletics have always been the entry point for better societal recognition for underrepresented classes. So I think this is,
by the way,
wonderful.
you guys,
Humanoid robot games in Boston this Sunday. The future is literally this weekend. What do enhanced games records look like over time?
The funny thing is, I would expect, so I haven't read the detailed rules for enhanced games, but I would expect if we are, as I think, in the middle of the singularity, I would expect to start to see scaling law type performance in benchmarks, as it were, in this case, world records for the enhanced games start to take off on a really impressive trajectory from year to year.
So don't even apply if you can't run a sub 10-second 100-meter dash. Like, don't even apply.
And maybe the weight calculation applies. Like, don't compete this year because next year the technologies will be exponentially better.
Scaling laws for world records. Bench the weight calculation each year. Wild BCI thought experiment incoming.
So Salim,
by the way, I gotta make-
Salim, when you're reincarnated, what happens to your exocortex via your BCI?
I have no idea, but it'll be fun to see what happens.
And does it speaking of speciation and forks, does it diverge from your trajectory after you're reincarnated?
Exocortex divergence on reincarnation, speciation in real time. Heavy. Would you actually be user one of a BCI?
Okay, fine. So I'll answer it with a conditional no, but hold on. The question that you really, in my mind, should have asked me is, would I be user number approximately 1 million if it is upgradable? Yes, probably.
Oh. Okay, if it's upgradable, would you be 101? I am trying to get your risk profile and how interested you are in this.
Very interested, but as with any new invasive drug, you don't, generally speaking, unless you're forced to, I would say this is not medical advice. You don't want to be user number 100. You want to be like user number 100,000 or million. So after 100,000 or a million, if it's upgradable, if I can walk through metal detectors, if it has sort of all of these nice affordances.
You have a lot of conditions, Alex. You have a lot of conditions for a godlike
transhumanist, Peter. My goodness,
to you for free.
But you know what? At least I'm not demanding to be reincarnated alongside my BCI, so I'm not that fussy.
All right. Okay.
Well, you know, one thing I really
user 100,000, not user 100. Smart. So who is actually the bad transhumanist here?
I would take a completely different position, Peter. And if anything, like while we're busy pointing fingers at each other saying, no, you're a bad transhumanist. No, you're a bad transhumanist. I'll say that wanting to be user number 100 of a BCI is actually being a bad transhumanist. Why? Because it's intrinsically betting that progress is going to be so slow that you need to be user 100 versus waiting a year or two for technology to advance exponentially so that you get to inject yourself.
Upgradable.
He said right in the question it's upgradable.
Okay,
you framed it very well, Peter.
If it's safe and upgradable, I'll probably do it.
Betting against exponential progress is the bad transhumanism, clean flip. Is star travel really a one-way sacrifice?
Okay, in the immortal words of the Star Trek Borg Queen, you imply a disparity where none exists, Peter. You're posing Sophie's Choice type questions about.
Of course, I'm trying to make this fun.
No, but you're implying it. Stop dodging the question. In all seriousness, you're opposing on the one hand one-way trips, on the other hand you get to go to the stars. This is a false choice. This is like a Sophie's choice that you're posing to transhumanists to get under our skin. Okay. I'd love to go to the stars, but I don't buy the premise that it's a one-way trip or needs to be a one-way trip. I literally wrote the paper on why intelligence manifests as optionality maximization.
What is my purpose here, Alex? It's to discover your level of risk aversion, your level of desire for extremes.
That may be your purpose, but the preferences that you're actually revealing are more how bad at optionality maximization are we in the face of
optionality maximization as the definition of intelligence. You literally wrote the paper. What else is hiding in that framing?
We're also implicitly ignoring the possibility of mergers. Like, why is speciation necessarily a one-way door at this point? If we have the ability, we'll have the ability to merge cyborgs into organisms, into uplifted animals, and all sorts of other crazy combinations.
Cyborg mergers with uplifted animals, infinite diversity, the Vulcan Edict. Would you actually upload yourself?
Well, I guess the elephant in the room is that I helped form a company called Eon Systems, encourage folks to check out Eon Systems if they're very interested in this. I think first generation uploads will be destructive. I think second, third, fourth generation uploads won't be destructive. If I had a choice, if it were a life and death situation and my alternative is death, I would choose a destructive upload. If I have choices, again, going back to my earlier comment, if I have a choice and it's sort of an elective uploading, no, I wouldn't choose a one-directional destructive uploading. I'd wait for third or fourth generation uploads that can be done non-destructively or incrementally.
All right, Dave, how about yourself?